Hey guys, welcome to another Iron Man update. I'm Stefan The All-In Nerd, and I'll be your host for this video. This is gonna be the last video in the series, and in this one we're gonna cover the chest and the back, including the Arc Reactor and the back flaps. And we're also gonna cover the neck and how I redid the helmet. And since wearing the suit at Comic-Con, I've done a few changes, so we're gonna cover that as well. The back and the chest were two of the parts that caused me the least problem during the convention. The back got quickly fixed with some electrical tape after an encounter with another visitor. And the chest ran out of power and just needed another power source. We managed to switch it while I was wearing the suit and was just about to enter the stage for the cosplay competition. I'll tell you, without the people I went there with, I would have been so lost and miserable. I probably still would be wandering around somewhere in Stockholm, trying to find someone there to undress me. Let's start by going through the progress of the chest. Printed into a big chest puzzle that I solved by PLA welding all the pieces together in correct way. Well, that's not completely true, because when I had finished the two halves and was about to just join them together, there was quite a bit of misalignment happening. And the reason? I still don't have a clue. I started to go through the print files of the parts I printed, to see if I printed any of them in the wrong size, or if I forgot to print a small wedge or something, but nope, couldn't find the reason. Wait, what? Now when I went through the files again for footage, I actually found the small wedge that I didn't know that I missed. At least now I know what caused it. But back then I made a custom wedge that I PLA welded in place. And here's how it looked after I slapped some wood filler on it. And I felt like I minimized the damage at least. In the end you could hardly tell. But the chest piece was designed in a way which made it hard to put on due to the tight fit in the back. The edges towards the back were too narrow for me, so I needed to cut them off. But to do that I needed to PLA weld it together with the back piece, and then cut it apart in another spot. So let's backtrack and go through the progress of the back piece up to this point. Just like the chest, I needed to divide the back into several smaller pieces and PLA weld them back together. And sanding the parts before made the sanding part so much easier. What can I say, it was quite time consuming. Hey! Didn't you spend several weeks on these parts already? Printing, assembling, filling, sanding, and even more sanding. Oh yeah, those parts turned out to be way too small, right? Just making sure you haven't forgotten. 'Cause you haven't forgotten, have you? How could I forget? After assembling the main part of the back, I sprayed it with sandable putty that I sanded down. And then it was time to join it with the chest. I glued the parts together with some hot glue, so it would be easier to weld it. Then it was time to cut the pieces apart again. I decided to cut it where it seemed to be a natural joint. There was some tension in the parts, so I had to try to align them with the help of my heating gun after, which caused some warping, but with some extra putty and sanding, it was all good. So now we continue with the chest. The chest felt a bit flimsy and fragile, so I printed some thin sheets of plastic that I reinforced the inside of it with. Then I printed and welded on the collar piece in the top. And during this point in time I started to fix the Arc Reactor too. But I'll go through that fully after I covered the chest part. Now I needed to decide on how I wanted to connect the chest and the back. I went back and forth in between a few ideas, but I ended up trying with a magnet system with some parts that I designed myself. I designed them to work with a double set of magnets to be extra powerful. But I noticed that the magnets got a bit too close to one another, and they almost cancelled each other out. So I went with just one set of magnets on each side. I had some straps with snap buttons keeping them in place, but after Comic-Con I decided to change them for Velcro straps instead, which works a lot better. And in the top I printed some extra pieces that fitted quite snug into the shoulders of the back piece. That kept it in the right position, and two straps with buckles keep them from coming apart. And the fit came out quite nice. I sprayed it with some sandable putty to smooth it out, and this was just when the first snow came here for the winter. The result got a bit of snowflakes on it, but since I was going to sand it down anyway, it didn't really matter. Then it was time for paint and battle damage. But before we check out how the result came out, we'll go through how I built the Arc Reactor. The Arc Reactor consists of a few pieces, and some of them are really detailed. So the result wouldn't be very good if I would print them with the filament printers. So I printed them with my resin printer instead. I printed the main part and cut off the back, so it wouldn't take up as much space in the chest, and I would be able to have access to it from the back. Then I got my hands on some clear resin, and I printed the actual reactor part with that, so my LEDs would shine through. The fit was quite snug, but after some sanding I got it to fit perfectly. I printed the round piece with the mesh, and I painted it silver with a brush. And over the mesh it was supposed to be another small piece, but I didn't like the one that came with the model, so I made one myself. Then it was time for the LEDs. I bought some different sized LED rings. I wired 3 together and I connected them to an Arduino board. After Comic-Con I'm just using 2 rings. Some code slapped on the board and we're rolling. I got the LEDs to work, but it wasn't really the color or pattern I was looking for, so I needed to change it up a bit. I went for a really bright white light with a tint of blue in it. I glued the LED rings onto a printed foundation with super glue. First I tried with hot glue, but the LEDs got quite warm, so they melted the glue. And then I glued that together with the outer part of the Arc Reactor. And now it's ready to pop in the chest. It fitted really nicely. I attached the Arduino and a holder for the power bank into the chest. And on the actual day I left for Comic-Con, I realized that I needed to redo how I got light in my repulsors, because the tilt sensors I first tried out turned out to be extremely unpredictable. So I decided to connect them with the Arduino for the Arc Reactor. So now there are cables going from the chest to each hand, and the repulsors are always on. I thought it would look weird having them on all the time, but it didn't bother me at all. But I did get some feedback that the light of the Arc Reactor might have been a bit too bright. So now I put in a dimmer button, so it's possible to change the brightness of both the Arc Reactor and the repulsors if needed. But now I think it's time to take a look at the final result of the chest. And now let's get back to where we left off with the back piece. The main part was now fully assembled and ready for the flaps. First I just assembled it to see how it all moved. Then to get the flaps moving I was going to use servos, and yet another Arduino. For the bigger flaps I used bigger servos just to make sure they would manage to lift and lower the flaps without struggle. I cut some vertical holes so the servo arms could move easily. I also designed some holders for the big servos. And at first I attached them with screws, using these threaded inserts in the back piece. But in the end I decided to weld the holder straight into the back, just to get a bit more space instead. Then it was some trial and error to get the lengths of the arm right and the angles of the servos correct. I got myself a servo tester, and that made this process a whole lot easier. Cutting holes in the suit is always nerve-wracking. I was afraid that obvious holes would be seen, but there was no need to worry. And before attaching all the servos into the suit, I needed to get the code correct, and this took quite some time. And in the end ChatGPT was there to save me. And now I could start to see some really nice results. I built it so all flaps would be able to move. But after Comic-Con I decided to PLA weld the smallest flap to be a part of the bigger one, because of the incident at the convention. Now the inside of all flaps and the servo arms got sprayed with some silver paint. Here you can see how the back looks all stripped out. And here's how it looks now with all the systems in. Quite a difference. And then I sprayed everything with sandable putty and I sanded it down yet again. Followed by primer, paint and battle damage. And just like with all my other parts, I've also sprayed them with satin varnish for a nice protective finish. And I also added some LEDs after Comic-Con. Let's have a look at how the back turned out. I'm really happy with the result, but there's always pieces that could need an upgrade. Alright, let's check out the neck. The plan for the neck was to print it with flexible PLA. But since that was quite expensive, I printed it in PLA first to make sure the measurements were correct. First of all, the neck that came with the model was way too high for me, so I needed to remove the top part. Then I printed it in 4 parts: the front, the back, and the sides that goes on the inside of each part. And since flexible prints are soft, they're difficult to sand. So I read about a tip about flexible prints, that if you put the parts in the freezer, they would get hard and it could be sanded. I tried that a few times, and the part did get a bit harder from the cold, but the result was not worth the hassle. So I did my best to sand them down the normal way. And then I figured that maybe I could just paint it with a few layers, and in between each coat I would sand down the high spots. And it came out quite good. Sure, a bit of flexibility disappears when you paint it that much, but it was flexible enough for me to open it up without cracks in the paint and to put it on. And after some Nuln Oil with a brush and battle damage slapped on, not many print lines were noticeable. I glued on some Velcro and it was finished. Pretty good, right? Alright, let's finish this up by checking out the helmet. Remember when the helmet looked like this? And I realized that the helmet was also a Mark II model and not the Mark III? And I didn't know if I would have time to redo it. Will I redo it? If there's time. We'll see. Well, since I knew it was wrong, I just couldn't leave it as it was. Even though most people, especially visitors on Comic-Con, wouldn't notice or think about it. But I figured it would be a quick fix. And I was wrong. And when I started filling up the holes with the putty, there was no turning back. I disassembled the faceplate, covered the teeth with frog tape and sanded down the putty. And in my stressful state, with the deadline quickly coming closer and so much left to build, I figured that I could save some time by just spraying it with Hot Rod Red straight away and be done with it. But I have been using black primer up until now, for a reason. Needless to say, the result didn't turn out great. Next time I sprayed it with sprayable putty first and sanding it down yet again, not to lose any detail. Then primer and then finally some red. Finally, this not so quick fix was done at least. No. For some reason the infill in the side of the print was showing through in the back of the helmet, and there was no way I would leave it like that. So it's time again for another quick fix. I covered the rest of the helmet, sanded down the failed part and sprayed it on another layer of red, hoping it would be enough to cover it. It wasn't. So yet again I needed to sand it down, spray on another layer of sandable putty to get a thicker layer, sand that down to get it smooth, primer and then red yet again. And with the gold, finally the result came out good. So battle damage again as well, and then assembly. The lesson to learn here is, shortcuts is not always the fastest way. Especially when you're stressed beyond reason. Anyway, here's the final result. And while we're at it, let's check out some proper final results of the whole suit. Alright, I'm doing it. Consider it done. I'm making a new Iron Man suit. And with that, the Iron Man series I've been making the last year has come to an end. Finally, right? The next step for me is Comic-Con Summer here in Sweden, which is in about 5 months. So before then, the suit should go through some major upgrades and improvements. So I'll be busy, don't you worry. And with that guys, I bid you farewell. I hope these series have given you inspiration to build something yourself, or just at least a little bit of entertainment. The All-In Nerd, out.